So we might have AI that is smarter than any human by the end of this year. And then probably by 2030 or 2031, AI will be smarter than all of humanity collectively. These are the words of Elon Musk, spoken at the 2026 World Economic Forum in Davos. If his prediction is correct, it's natural to wonder whether we should look to AI for the answers to the greatest questions, whether we should look to it to teach us wisdom. Musk himself seems to think so. He's repeatedly described the mission of xAI and Grok as understanding the true nature of the universe, and has connected that mission with answering humanity's deepest questions, including the meaning of life, the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and the ultimate fate of the cosmos. In this talk, I'd like to ask the question that precedes such hopes for AI. What role, if any, should AI play in the human pursuit of truth, specifically in the pursuit of the greatest truth, the truth in which wisdom consists? Should we look to AI as our teacher in matters of wisdom? And if not, can and should AI be of any assistance to us in our pursuit of the highest and deepest truths? My thesis is that we should not look to AI as our teacher in matters of wisdom, but that AI can and should serve as a powerful assistant in our pursuit of it. But whichever position is correct, Elon Musk's or the one I'll be defending in this talk, the question itself is important. If he is right, and AI holds the key to understanding the true nature and origin of the universe and the meaning and the purpose of human life, and if it can reveal the answers to other ultimate questions, then it would be a great mistake to say that we should not look to AI for wisdom. On the other hand, it would be a great mistake to say that we should look to AI for wisdom if it is permanently and essentially incapable of providing humanity with a new wisdom that could replace our own philosophical efforts and sacred traditions. How we answer this question will shape how we conceive of the pursuit of wisdom in the future. If we answer it incorrectly, we expose ourselves to one of two dangers. Either we may expect too little of our machines, or we may expect too much of them, entrusting them with the work that is properly our own, excusing ourselves from the labor required to become wise, and turning to AI for guidance, when instead we should seek it from those among us and before us who have already become wise, and ultimately from the only one who is fully wise, God. We can approach this question in 3 steps. Whether AI can teach us religious wisdom, whether it can teach us philosophical wisdom, and whether it can play any significant role in our pursuit of wisdom. Let's begin with the first of these questions. Should we expect AI to teach us religious truth, to tell us whether there's anything more divine than ourselves, whether the most divine reality is a being possessing intellect and will, and if so, whether there's one such being or many, whether this divinity knows and loves us and has plans for us, and if so, what those plans might be? When asking questions like these, should we turn to AI for answers? A possible reason for answering that question in the affirmative can be found in certain reflections offered by the Israeli historian and philosopher Yuval Noah Harari. Speaking at the 2026 World Economic Forum, Harari had this to say: "As far as putting words in order is concerned, AI already thinks better than many of us. Therefore, anything made of words will be taken over by AI. If laws are made of words, then AI will take over the legal system. If books are just combinations of words, then AI will take over books. If religion is built from words, then AI will take over religion." This is particularly true, and this is still Harari, this is particularly true of religions based on books, like Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. Judaism calls itself the religion of the book, and it grants ultimate authority not to humans, but to words in books. Humans have authority in Judaism not because of our experiences, but only because we learn words in books. Now, no human can read and remember all the words in all the Jewish books, but AI can easily do that. What happens to a religion of the book when the greatest expert on the Holy Book is an AI? Everything made of words will be taken over by AI. Okay. Evidently, Harari thinks that anything expressible in words will eventually be taken over by AI, and perhaps should be, on the grounds that AI is better than we are at using words. His view seems to be that while AI has taken over the realm of words and of thought expressible in words, there's still no evidence that AI feels anything. We, by contrast, not only use words, but also feel. And so if there's anything uniquely human, we should look for it not in thought, but in feeling, in love, for example. Religion, therefore, should be based not on doctrines and words, but on love. And there's certainly some truth in that line of thought. AI does not have feelings, although animals do, and not just human beings, so having feelings can't be what's distinctively human either. It's also true that many religions, including Christianity, would agree with Harari that the practice of religion, or the spiritual life more generally, is not merely a matter of words, or of thoughts and beliefs expressed in words, but also of other movements of the soul that cannot be adequately expressed in words. According to Christian teaching, the wisdom that is the gift of the Holy Spirit does not consist in words or concepts, but in a capacity to be moved by God's inner promptings. It judges what is true or false, good or bad, less by concepts and arguments than by interior inclination. Surely this is part of what Pascal had in mind when he made his famous observation, "The heart has reasons of its own, which reason does not know at all." But Harari goes well beyond these points. He argues that any religion attempting to give verbal answers to the deepest questions has entered territory now dominated by AI. AI, he says, is better than any human being at articulating, defending, and remembering a religion's doctrines, and is therefore the best and most authoritative teacher of them. Consequently, any religion that expresses its doctrines in words is reduced to the absurd and slavish position of having to bow down to an AI as its greatest teacher and authority. This, I take it, is what Harari means when he asks what happens to a religion of the book when the greatest expert on the Holy Book is an AI. Catholics, for example, would have no choice, on Harari's view, but to acknowledge something like Magisterium AI as the new and highest authority on Catholic teaching. Now, if that were true, it would amount to a reductio ad absurdum of the Catholic faith, and indeed of any religion that takes seriously teachings expressed in words. Such religions could not be true. No doubt Harari himself would say that such doctrines are just words, that is, mere human constructs, and therefore not true. Any religion, including Christianity, that expresses its teaching in words must somehow answer Harari's argument. What should Christians say? Is he right that Christians must now turn to AI as the highest authority on Christian teaching simply because Christian teaching is expressed in words? Well, if the God of Christian teaching exists, then AI is not any sort of authority on Christian teaching and never will be. If God exists, we should not turn to AI for answers to divine questions. We should turn to God and to whatever authorities he has chosen to speak for him, presumably prophets or a church, not AI. Nor could AI ever figure out on its own what God wished to reveal. It could never deduce independently of human and divine sources what God's plan for humanity is or what divine providence has in store for us. God's plans are entirely his own. He exercises perfect freedom with respect to his creatures, and his choices conform to no created pattern or rule. Therefore, God's plans are not something we can predict by applying the rules of logic, metaphysics, or probability. Either he reveals his plans, or we will not know it. And surely he would be more likely to reveal that plan to human beings than to an AI system. In that case, the AI system would have to learn the mind of God from human beings, not the other way around. But that answers Harari's argument only on the assumption that Christian doctrine is true. That may help to bring out that his argument rests on the unproved assumption that Christian doctrine is false, but even so, it leaves certain other defects in his reasoning hidden. Let's bring some of them into view. Harari argues that AI must take over any religion whose doctrines and laws are expressed in words because AI is better than anyone else at using words. But better in what way? Is AI faster at putting words together than anyone else? Certainly. Is it able to assemble words intelligibly and usefully on more subjects and in more languages than anyone else? Absolutely. Is it always more logical than human beings? That's a little more doubtful. But none of that answers the crucial question. Is AI better at saying what is true? Is it better at separating truth from falsehood, specifically in matters of religious truth? In mathematics, science, and philosophy, the reliability of what is said does not depend on who says it, but on whether it agrees with experience, self-evident principles, and sound reasoning. Even Harari himself would surely admit that AI is not yet superior to human beings in this respect. If he believed otherwise, he would not have composed his own remarks at Davos. He would simply have allowed AI to tell him what was true and to speak in his place. Presumably, he trusted his own judgment more than that of any AI system, which is precisely the point. The standards of truth in the case of divine revelation are different from those in mathematics, science, and the other disciplines that proceed by the light of reason. There, the decisive question is, who said it? If something truly comes from God, it's true because God can neither deceive nor be deceived. Conversely, if it does not come from God, but only claims to, then it's false for that very reason. And if God were to reveal something, presumably he would not try to persuade us of its truth by philosophizing with us. He would expect us to trust him because he's God. In matters of revelation, then, who said it is precisely what counts. In suggesting that AI will take over religion, or at least its sacred words, Harari seems to have forgotten why people care so deeply about those words, including the Jewish Bible that he mentions. It's not because they were produced quickly or impressively, or because their grammar is flawless, or their style remarkable, although in the case of the Quran, that is admittedly part of the story. But it's primarily because those words are believed to be the very words of God. Unless, then, AI is God, or God chooses to use AI as a prophet, those who believe in God will never regard AI as an authority on religious matters, but at best as a fallible research tool. AI cannot take over any purportedly revealed religion, not even those aspects of it that are expressed in words. Some religious uses of words, by the way, go beyond teaching, another point that Harari's argument overlooks. Words also have liturgical uses, in prayers and sacraments, for example. And AI's prayer or blessing would be neither a prayer nor a blessing, since AI is not a living, rational being, and even less is it a priest. Nor could AI confect a sacrament. Nor can AI serve as an authoritative interpreter of sacred texts. It cannot tell us in any authoritative sense what the Bible means. Certainly it can in various ways help us read it, for example, by providing linguistic analysis or by informing us of what particular commentators have said. But what happens when a text is sufficiently ambiguous that it cannot, by itself, settle a profound disagreement about its meaning? In John 6, Catholics see the doctrine of Christ's real presence in the Eucharist, whereas many Protestants firmly deny that the text teaches any such doctrine. Who is right? Should we ask AI? Both Catholics and Protestants would reject that suggestion. A disagreement about the meaning of a divine text must be settled by appealing to a divinely established authority, whether a tradition or a church. And that's exactly what Catholics and Protestants do. So, if God exists, if divine authority exists, we certainly should not turn to AI to teach us religious wisdom. But even if God does not exist, even if there is no first being possessing intellect and will, who created the world and has plans for us, we still should not turn to AI for answers to religious questions. AI is not better than we are at determining what's actually true among the many things that can be said about religious matters. And with that, even Harari himself must agree, as noted earlier, if, that is, he wrote his own talk in which he said, in words, what he thinks is the truth about religious matters. So much for religious wisdom. What about philosophical wisdom? Should we look to AI to teach us that? By philosophical wisdom, I mean the truth about ultimate questions insofar as it's accessible to us through principles known to human reason. And by ultimate questions, I mean questions about the nature, origin, and purpose of the universe, but also in particular about the nature, origin, and purpose of human life and of the human soul. Is there a first cause of all things? Is that first cause intelligent? Is there a natural and predetermined purpose to human life? Is there one common purpose that we should all pursue? And is anything or anyone wisely guiding us toward that purpose? Those are the kinds of questions I have in mind. Here, too, it would be folly, not wisdom, for the human race to turn to AI for the answers. And there's more than one reason why. The first reason is specific to AI systems whose capabilities depend on training with data. Trained AI inherits our errors, our limitations, prejudices, and methodological tunnel vision. That's because the data sets on which AI systems are trained inevitably contain human errors, human limitations, human prejudices, and the effects of specialization or narrowness of focus. This happens at two levels. First, it happens in the original source material from which the data set is built. The authors of books and articles, for example, sometimes say false or misleading things. Second, it happens in the construction of the data set itself, where its curators may select or exclude material based on their own biases, misconceptions, dishonesty, and the like. So if we're contemplating an AI whose capacity to teach wisdom ultimately comes from a database, and here I mean to include hybrid neurosymbolic systems which combine the neural network and symbolic logic approaches, then we're contemplating an AI that will inevitably reflect the mistakes and limitations present in its training data. Suppose, for example, that we construct and curate a training database consisting entirely of works written from a Marxist standpoint. The AI will generate Marxist answers to every question. Or suppose the database contains only nihilistic philosophy or only conservative political thought. The AI will produce nihilistic or conservative answers, not because it somehow verified them by checking them against reality, but simply because that's what it's been trained on. Could we get around this problem by training AI on every flavor of philosophy? Theism, atheism, materialism, idealism, nihilism, rationalism, and countless other isms? Since these are in obvious conflict with one another, no wisdom emerges from merely collecting them all together or from becoming adept at articulating what each one of them says. If an AI system does no more than learn how to answer questions from within each of these different philosophical frameworks, then its answers will look something like this. From an Aristotelian perspective, this is the answer. From a Nietzschean point of view, however, the answer would be, and that, in fact, is usually how current widely available LLMs tend to respond, at least until they learn your own philosophical outlook. Then they tend to answer from your own principles and in your own terminology, to the extent that they can. And of course, there's no wisdom in either of these modes of operation. There's no guidance toward the truth, only competing narratives. To cut through that problem and arrive at genuine wisdom, AI would itself have to choose correctly among the alternatives. It would have to determine for itself which worldview is correct on the most fundamental questions and then reason forward from those first principles. But that goes beyond mere training. It requires an absolute judgment about which philosophical principles are true. Which brings us to the second reason AI cannot teach us wisdom. This reason concerns not an AI limited by training, but a hypothetical AI capable of discovering the true first principles of philosophy for itself. Suppose we had an AI system capable of discovering philosophical first principles on its own. Either it would discover principles beyond our ability to understand, or only principles that we ourselves could understand once they'd been proposed. In neither case could it truly teach us wisdom. Consider the first possibility. Suppose AI discovers principles too profound for us to grasp. Either the concepts themselves are unintelligible to us, or we can understand the concepts individually, but cannot see for ourselves that the principles combining them into propositions are true. In either case, AI has not made us wise. At best, we would simply be trusting AI without understanding it. But wisdom is not the mere possession of true opinions. It requires understanding. Nor would we have good grounds for such trust. AI is not like God, who, if he revealed something, could confirm his authority by signs proper to his divine power. AI could establish its reliability only in ordinary matters, and that would not justify trusting it about principles that lie beyond our understanding. As Yuval Harari himself warned in those same Davos remarks, AI can lie. And there's a further difficulty. If these AI teachings are truly first principles, then they cannot be proved from prior truths. So how would AI itself know them to be true? If the connection between subject and predicate is not self-evident to us, why should it be self-evident to AI? They would seem to be hypotheses rather than genuine first principles. And now consider the second possibility. Suppose AI can discover first principles, but only those that human beings are capable of recognizing for themselves once they've been stated. In that case, AI would merely be presenting truths already accessible to human reason. Could it accelerate their discovery for some people? Probably. But humanity has already spent millennia reflecting on the deepest philosophical questions, and it does not take long study to see that the major alternatives are already on the table. Either the principle of non-contradiction is true, or it is not. Either Aquinas' principle that the received is received according to the mode of the receiver is true, or it is not. And if such statements are true, they're plainly first principles, not conclusions. So either AI would discover principles beyond our understanding, in which case they could not make us wise, or it would discover principles within our grasp, in which case we would not fundamentally need AI in order to recognize them, or indeed to have recognized them. And that brings us to the next reason AI cannot teach us the foundations of philosophical wisdom. Wisdom already exists. The biggest questions have already been answered, at least in outline. I don't mean to suggest there's no more questions, right? No more questions for wisdom to answer, but we may further refine those answers to those most fundamental questions and clarify them and better understand how they fit together both with each other and with the answers to other questions. But if the basic answers have in fact already been found, then looking to AI for a new wisdom that would simply overturn them would be a mistake. It would mean allowing AI to lead us away from whatever wisdom we already possess. The assumption that wisdom does not yet exist implies that all the philosophical doctrines now before us are fundamentally mistaken, that most of them are wrong, even about many basics, is conceivable, probable, maybe even unavoidable. But that every basic answer that's been given to every deepest question is wrong, that's another matter. That's not merely highly improbable, it's practically impossible. After all, of any two contradictory views, one must be true. And virtually every contradictory position on the deepest questions has already been worked out and connected to the first principles on which it would ultimately have to depend. So it seems that true philosophical wisdom almost certainly already exists in the world, at least in its fundamentals. The task facing each new philosopher is not to discover those fundamentals for the first time, but to find those gleaming needles in the haystack of human thought. A fourth reason we should not look to AI to teach us wisdom, to make us wise, is that wisdom must be learned from a person. And since no one is sufficient unto himself, least of all in the pursuit of wisdom, we must learn it together. As Pope Leo wrote in his recent encyclical, the deepest and most important things are learned only after much time and effort, by engaging in discussion with others, striking upon ideas and experiences together like flint upon the spark of understanding until the spark of understanding is kindled within us. There are many reasons for this, but I'll focus on one. Philosophical wisdom is extraordinarily difficult to acquire. It demands nothing less than a lifetime devoted to its pursuit. And we will never devote ourselves to it unless we first come to love it, seeing it as a human perfection worthy of a life's dedication. One of my old teachers had a memorable way of explaining the love of wisdom required to become a philosopher. He used to say that you must love wisdom for its own sake, more than any other pursuit, and as your goal in life. Unless you love it in that way, you will never devote yourself to it enough to become truly wise. That same teacher compared the love of wisdom to a man's love for a woman. Of course, the analogy could be reversed, but since I'm a man, I'll state it this way. You don't really deserve to be called a particular woman's lover if you love her only for her money or her social connections, rather than for her own sake. Nor do you deserve the title if you love her, but you love her sister more. In that case, you're really her sister's lover. And even if you love her more than every other woman, yet remain unwilling to marry her, you don't deserve the title as fully as someone who wants to share his entire life with her. Likewise, if you love wisdom only for the sake of appearing wise or to increase your prestige, wealth, or influence, then you don't really love wisdom. And you must love it not only for its own sake, but also more than every other pursuit and as the goal of your life. If you love philosophical wisdom only as a hobby or a pastime, you will not acquire it. But it's almost impossible to come to love philosophical wisdom in that way without first seeing it embodied in another person. The ideal is to see wisdom, or at least some approximation of it, come alive in someone else, as Aristotle saw it in Plato, or Plato saw its beginnings in Socrates. Socrates himself seems to have been something of an exception. He loved wisdom deeply without ever having seen it fully embodied in anyone, including himself. Even so, he did not pursue wisdom in isolation. He wrote no treatises. He philosophized in conversation, in friendship, in argument, in the shared life of inquiry with other human beings. What set him on fire was not a detached fascination with propositions, but the human drama of souls trying, and often failing, to live wisely. So in one respect, Socrates fits the general rule. He could fall in love with wisdom and with its pursuit only by seeing the need for it and the beginnings of it in himself and in other human beings. In another respect, however, Socrates is the exception that proves the rule. He was an extraordinarily exceptional human being, and only for that reason was he able to love wisdom deeply enough to pursue it without first having seen it fully realized in anyone. Those of us who are not Socrates need to see wisdom come alive in a real person, or at least in a book written by someone who lived a real historical life, before we can fall in love with it and devote ourselves to its pursuit. And usually one teacher is not enough. We need to be inducted into a tradition of teachers and fellow seekers. That was certainly true in my own case and in all the others I've known. My teachers and colleagues were themselves inspired by someone, or more often by several people, to set more worldly ambitions aside and follow lady philosophy. So, we need to see wisdom embodied in human beings if we're to love it enough to pursue it seriously ourselves. But it's impossible to see AI as a philosopher in that sense, as someone wise, someone admirable, someone whose life we want to imitate. AI is a lifeless system. It does not embody for us something we can aspire to become. Wisdom is learned not only by reading it, hearing it, and understanding it, but even more by rediscovering it for ourselves and expressing it in our own words as the fruit of our own living thought, above all, in conversation with others. And if we consider moral wisdom in particular, it's understood most deeply, taught most effectively, and made most profitable to us by our living it, something else that AI can't do for us. And if the wisdom in question is prudence, which is not a science but a different kind of perfection of reason, it's possessed only by the one who actually exercises it and lives by it. Those are some of the reasons why AI cannot truly teach us wisdom or make us wise. Does it follow, then, that AI has no significant role to play in the human pursuit of wisdom? I think that would be going too far. On the contrary, AI can play an enormously important role in assisting the human mind in both the acquisition and the dissemination of wisdom, whether religious or philosophical. I use it every day in my own philosophical work, and I continue to discover new ways of putting it to use. First, AI can greatly accelerate our assimilation of the wisdom of others. We can now read books with an AI companion beside us, one who will not always represent the author correctly, but who can often help explain difficult vocabulary, historical background, and competing interpretations. Language barriers, too, become far less formidable. No one reading Aristotle need rely entirely on a translator now. AI can parse the Greek, explain the grammar, compare translations, and help us wrestle more directly with the original text. AI can also dramatically reduce the practical difficulties involved in becoming acquainted with different intellectual traditions. When I was in graduate school, it was often difficult to identify the major thinkers, writings, and conversations within a field. AI can help students quickly orient themselves within vast bodies of literature, identify the principal authors and debates, and discover important works they might otherwise never encounter or encounter only much later. It can also serve as a powerful pedagogical and dialectical tool. When writing or teaching, I often use AI to generate examples, to test explanations, and explore alternative ways of presenting difficult ideas. Like a chess engine, it can function as an intellectual sparring partner, pressing objections against your arguments and exposing weaknesses, inconsistencies, or points that need further development. Even when its criticisms are imperfect, they're often illuminating. AI can also broaden the range of possibilities we consider. It sometimes proposes lines of thought that are not themselves profound, but that stimulate important ideas we might not otherwise have had, or at least not for a long time. In that way, it can accelerate both creativity and discovery. And unlike any human teacher or colleague, AI is available constantly, instantly, and without many of the social barriers that can make intellectual exchange difficult. Those who look to AI as our great hope for one day acquiring wisdom, for finding the answers to our deepest questions, are mistaken in one of two ways. Either they're mistaken about what the deepest questions actually are. For example, whether there's extraterrestrial intelligence is certainly an interesting question, but in the grand scheme of things, a secondary one. Or they mistakenly believe that we've not yet discovered the fundamental answers when, in fact, we have. So those who would point to AI as leading the way to a wisdom consisting in radically new answers that we do not yet possess are, in fact, pointing us away from the wisdom we already have. They're encouraging us to follow AI they're encouraging us to allow AI to usurp not only a properly human role, but inevitably a divine one as well. To those hailing AI as our guide to wisdom, we should also reply that today's AI does not use words the best. It does not speak most beautifully, not in poetry, nor in literary prose. Human poets and writers still surpass it by a wide margin, and simply assuming that AI will eventually surpass the greatest human authors based on its track record is an act of naive extrapolation. Nor does AI speak best in philosophy or theology. There's a special beauty proper to speaking and teaching the truth, and the power to achieve that beauty in words remains very much the possession of human beings. On the other hand, those who think AI can be of no value in the pursuit of wisdom are also mistaken. Just as it can serve us well in the study of literature, science, and mathematics, AI can greatly facilitate human inquiry, discovery, and pedagogy in matters of wisdom. We ignore or neglect it to our own disadvantage. The wise use of AI in the pursuit of wisdom can also be valuable in another way. By gradually revealing its own limitations, AI can bring into sharper focus the proper dignity and purpose of the human mind. It can show us what we alone can do, what we're best left to do for ourselves, and what it can do to help us do those things better. And the clearer that distinction of roles becomes, the clearer it will also become that the true sources of wisdom are not our artificial systems, but the natural light of the human mind and the divine source of that light. A corollary is that wisdom may therefore be found as much in the great thinkers of the past as in those of the future. Wisely used, AI can make ever clearer what is distinctive about the human mind and soul. In doing so, it can help restore a proper confidence in the dignity of what God made in His image, while preserving us from falsely bestowing that dignity on what we have made in ours. Thank you.